The sun hammered down on the Arizona territory, a relentless forge that turned the air into shimmering waves of heat. It was the summer of 1874, and the land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the sky to break. To the west, bruised purple clouds were gathering heavy and low over the flat-topped mesas, promising a storm that smelled of ozone and wet dust. But here, on the valley floor, the earth was dry enough to crack bone. Kai sat atop his paint horse, a stillness in his posture that belonged to the rocks and the sagebrush. He watched the iron rails stretching out into the distance, two parallel lines of cold metal gleaming under the merciless sun. They looked like a scar, a fresh, silver wound sliced right across the red chest of the desert. Men were working down the line, their hammers ringing against spikes in a rhythm that sounded like a death knell to the silence of the canyon. He turned his horse away from the sight. The animal huffed, shifting its weight, sensing the storm on the horizon. Kai stroked its neck, his hand dark against the coarse mane. He was a man caught between the fading echoes of the past and the roaring steam engine of the future. At 32 years old, he carried the weathered look of someone who had seen too much of both. He wore the buckskins of his people, the Navajo, but his hair was cut shorter than the traditional style, a lingering habit from his years serving as a scout for the army. That service had ended the day he realized the bluecoats did not want peace. They wanted submission. He had walked away from the fort, leaving behind the uniform, but keeping the English language and the bitter knowledge of how the white man's law worked. It worked like a ratchet, always turning in one direction, tightening until there was no room left to breathe. Today, he was riding into Red Rock not as a scout, and not quite as a warrior, but as a diplomat of last resort. The elders had sent him. The railroad company wanted the Crimson Valley. To the surveyors, it was just the path of least resistance for their tracks. To the Navajo, it was the place where the spirits of the ancestors slept, a sanctuary of water and shadow that had sustained the people for generations. Kai urged his horse forward, descending the rocky trail toward the cluster of wooden buildings that marred the valley floor. Red Rock was a town built on ambition and dust. It was a place where the wind always blew, carrying the scent of cattle manure, stale beer, and raw lumber. As he rode onto the main street, the atmosphere shifted. The casual chatter of pedestrians died down. A woman sweeping her porch paused, clutching her broom like a weapon. A group of men loitering outside the livery stable stopped their whittling and spitting to stare. Kai kept his back straight, his face an impassive mask. He was used to the looks. To them, he was a remnant of a problem they thought they had already solved. He tied his horse to the rail outside the marshal's office, but did not go in yet. He needed to gauge the temper of the town. He walked toward the saloon, the heels of his boots thumping softly on the boardwalk. The swinging doors groaned as he pushed through. Inside, the air was cooler but thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. It was early afternoon, yet half the tables were full. The piano in the corner was silent, the player likely sleeping off the previous night. Kai moved to the far end of the bar, ordering a glass of water. The bartender, a man with a walrus mustache and eyes like flint, hesitated for a second before sliding a dirty glass across the wood. He did not offer whiskey, and Kai did not ask for it. "The town is full," a voice drifted from a nearby table. It was a cattleman, his hat pushed back to reveal a sunburned forehead. "I reckon half the territory is coming in for the wedding." "It is not every day Silas Harlan gets married," another man replied, chuckling. "Especially to Hart. That is a merger, not a marriage. Combining the biggest herd in the county with the best water rights." Kai took a sip of the tepid water, his eyes scanning the room in the mirror behind the bar. The name Harlan was familiar. Silas Harlan was the man pushing the railroad contract. He was the power behind the surveyor's maps. But the other name struck a chord that vibrated deep in Kai's chest, a sound he had not heard in years. Hart. The memory did not come as a picture at first, but as a sensation. The feeling of cold rain soaking through deerskin, the smell of wet slate and fear. 10 years ago. Kai closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the noise of the saloon fade. He was 22 then, young and full of a fiery hope that had not yet been extinguished. He had been tracking a mountain lion near the border of the territory when the storm hit. It was a deluge, a wall of water that turned dry creek beds into raging rivers in a matter of minutes. He had found her huddled under a rock overhang in a box canyon, shivering so violently her teeth clattered like stones. She was a slip of a girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, with hair the color of dry straw and eyes wide with terror. She had wandered off from her family's wagon, or perhaps she had been running away. He never asked. When he first approached, she screamed, scrambling back against the stone wall. To her, he was the monster from the stories her parents told around the fire, but the water was rising, and the cold was a more immediate killer than the savage she feared. He had built a small fire, shielding it with his body. He offered her dried meat. He spoke to her in the halting English he was just beginning to learn. Do not fear. The storm passes. It always passes. She had stared at him, her small hands gripping her knees. Slowly, the fear in her eyes had melted into curiosity. She had reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched the turquoise amulet tied around his wrist. "It is blue," she had whispered, "like the sky when it is not angry. It keeps the spirit safe." Kai had told her, "I will not forget this," she had said, her voice fierce with the solemnity of childhood. "I will not forget you." They had waited out the storm. Together, two souls huddled against the indifference of nature, but the morning brought the world back. A search party of men from the settlement had found them. They did not see a savior. They saw a Navajo standing over a white girl. Guns were drawn. Insults were spat like venom. "Get away from her," a man had shouted, striking Kai with the butt of his rifle. The girl had screamed, trying to run to him, trying to tell them, but her father had scooped her up, covering her mouth, carrying her away as if he were rescuing her from the jaws of a wolf. Kai had stood there, blood trickling from his temple, watching them drag her back to their world. He had never learned her first name, just the name painted on the side of their wagon. Heart. Kai opened his eyes. The saloon mirror showed only his own reflection, hard, dark, unyielding. That girl was gone, a memory washed away by time. The woman the men were discussing was likely a stranger who shared a name. "They say the Hart girl had no choice," the cattleman continued, lowering his voice. "Her father left that ranch in ruin when he died. The brother is too young and too wild to run it. Harlan paid off the banknotes. The girl is just the receipt." "Pretty receipt, though," the other man leered. "I saw her at the dressmaker, looking pale as a ghost, but beautiful, like a china doll." Kai set his glass down, the water unfinished. He did not like the taste of this conversation. He had a mission. He was here to speak for the land, not to listen to gossip about a rich man buying a wife. He needed to find Marshal Boone. The marshal was a pragmatist. He was the only lawman in the territory who listened to reason before he listened to a bribe. Just as Kai turned to leave, the saloon door swung open with a violence that silenced the room. Silas Harlan walked in. He was a man who took up space, not because of his size, which was average, but because of the way he carried himself. He wore a suit of fine gray wool, impeccably tailored, with a silk vest that gleamed in the dim light. A gold watch chain draped across his stomach, and his boots were polished to a shine that defied the dusty street outside. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that moved constantly, assessing the value of everything they touched. "Gentlemen," Silas boomed, his voice smooth and cultivated. "Drinks are on me today. Tomorrow I take a wife, and next week we break ground on the new spur line. Prosperity is coming to Red Rock, and it is riding on iron rails." A cheer went up from the tables. Men raised their glasses to the man who owned half the valley and was about to buy the other half. Silas walked to the bar, flanked by two men who looked less like ranch hands and more like hired guns. He stopped a few feet from Kai. The cheer died down as the room noticed the proximity, the wealthy landowner and the Navajo warrior. Silas turned slowly, looking Kai up and down with a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a deer that did not know it was already dead. "Well now," Silas said, "I did not expect to see one of the people in here." "Usually. You stick to the reservation, don't you?" "I am here to see the marshal," Kai said, his voice steady. "And the representative from the railroad." Silas laughed. A short, dry bark. "The railroad. My dear fellow, I am the railroad. At least, I speak for the investors. And as for the marshal, he is busy ensuring the church is ready for my nuptials." He stepped closer, the smell of expensive cologne and stale tobacco wafting from him. "Let me save you some time, warrior. If you are here about that dusty stretch of canyon your people seem so fond of, the answer is no. Progress does not detour for superstition." "It is not superstition," Kai said. "It is our home. There are other routes. The northern pass is flat." "The northern pass adds 20 miles of track," Silas countered, his voice hardening. 20 miles costs money. Blasting through your canyon costs me nothing but powder, and powder is cheap. Go back to your elders. Tell them Silas Harlan suggests they move their camps before the blasting starts. I would hate for anyone to get hurt." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Kai felt the old anger rising, the heat of it behind his ribs, but he clamped down on it. Violence here, now, would doom his mission. It would give Silas exactly what he wanted, an excuse. "The treaty protects the canyon," Kai said quietly. "Treaties are paper." Silas sneered, turning his back on Kai to address the room. "And paper burns. Bartender whiskey for my friends. We celebrate the future." Kai stood for a moment longer, looking at the back of the man who intended to carve up the earth for profit. He realized then that this was not just about land. This was a man who was consumed. He consumed land, he consumed water, and now he was consuming a family named Hart. Kai pushed away from the bar and walked out into the blinding afternoon light. The heat hit him like a physical blow. He untied his horse, his movements mechanical. The encounter with Silas had confirmed his worst fears. There would be no negotiation. Men like Harlan did not negotiate. They took. As he mounted his horse, the wind picked up, whipping grit against his face. The storm over the mesas was moving closer, the clouds turning from purple to a bruised black. He should leave. He should ride back to the camp, gather the warriors, and prepare for a fight that they would likely lose but could not avoid. That was his duty. But as he looked down the street, his gaze was drawn to the white steeple of the church rising above the low roofs of the town. A carriage was pulled up in front of the general store nearby. A woman was stepping out of it, accompanied by an older woman who fussed with her skirts. From this distance, he could not see her face clearly. He only saw the slump of her shoulders, a posture of defeat that no young bride should carry. She looked small against the vast backdrop of the harsh desert town. "I will not forget you," the voice from the past whispered in his ear, carried on the rising wind. Kai tightened his grip on the reins. He was a fool. That girl from the cave was a child. This woman was a stranger, a pawn in a rich man's game. He had his own people to save. He could not save everyone. "Ride," he told himself aloud. He turned the horse's head toward the edge of town, intending to make camp in the foothills and wait for the marshal to be free. He would try one more time to speak to the law. He would follow the path of reason until it ran out. But as he rode past the alleyways and the false-fronted stores, he saw a poster nailed to the wall of the sheriff's office. It was a wanted poster for a horse thief, old and faded. Next to it was a fresh notice, the ink still black. Notice of auction. Hart Ranch property, to be settled upon marriage of Miss Lily Hart to Mr. Silas Harlan. Lily. The name stopped him cold. It was not just Hart. It was Lily, the flower that grew in the white man's gardens, delicate and needing water. He remembered the girl in the cave telling him her name, just before the men came. "My name is Lily," like the flower. The coincidence was a stone in his gut. The girl he had saved from the flood was now drowning in a different way. She was being sold to the man who wanted to destroy Kai's house, Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Kai looked up at the sky. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall, heavy and sparse, kicking up puffs of dust where they landed. The storm was here. He knew he should keep riding. He knew that getting involved in the affairs of a white woman, especially the wife-to-be of Silas Harlan, was a death sentence. It was madness. It went against every instinct of survival he had honed over the last decade. But he did not ride toward the open desert. Instead, he guided his horse toward the livery stable on the edge of town. He would stay. He told himself it was to wait for the marshal. He told himself it was to gather intelligence on Silas Harlan's operation. He lied to himself as he handed the reins to the stable boy, a scrawny kid with a limp. Kai looked toward the church again. "Big wedding tomorrow," the boy said, spitting into the straw. "The whole town is talking about it. They say she is the prettiest thing west of the Mississippi, but she looks sadder than a three-legged dog." "Is that so?" Kai asked, his voice neutral. "Yep. Harlan is a mean one. Rich as Croesus, but mean. I would not want to be in her shoes." Kai paid the boy 50 cents to feed and water the horse. "Take good care of him." "Are you staying for the party, Chief?" the boy asked cheekily. "I'm staying for the storm." Kai responded. He walked out into the rain, which was falling harder now, washing the dust from the boardwalks. He found a spot under the awning of the general store, across from the church. He watched as the carriage he had seen earlier began to move away. Inside, he caught a glimpse of a profile. Pale skin, a sharp jawline, and eyes that stared out at the rain with a haunting emptiness. It was the face of a woman who had already said goodbye to her life. But in the curve of her cheek, in the way she held her head, he saw the shadow of the child who had huddled next to him in the dark, touching his turquoise charm with wonder. Kai Nez stood in the shadows as the carriage rolled past, the wheels churning the mud. The conflict in his heart was as violent as the thunder rolling over the mesas. He had come to Red Rock to fight for a valley. But now, standing in the rain, he realized the battleground had shifted. The past had not stayed dead. It had grown up, and it was calling to him. He leaned back against the rough wood of the wall, crossing his arms over his chest. He would watch. He would wait. And tomorrow, when Silas Harlan tried to claim his prize, the Navajo warrior would be watching. The wind howled through the streets of Red Rock, carrying the scent of sage and rain. It sounded like a warning, or perhaps a challenge. Kai adjusted the knife at his belt, his expression unreadable. "We shall see, Silas Harlan," he whispered to the rain. "We shall see." The storm that had been threatening the horizon finally descended upon Red Rock just as evening began to bleed into the sky. It was not a storm of rain, for the clouds were stingy with their moisture, but a storm of wind and red grit. The gale howled down from the mesas, stripping the leaves from the cottonwoods and rattling the loose boards of the town like the bones of a skeleton. Kai Nez stood at the window of the small room he had rented above the livery stable. It was a poor lodging, smelling of horse sweat and old hay, but it offered a vantage point. Through the swirling dust, he could see the church across the main street. Every window of the wooden structure was ablaze with lamplight, glowing like a beacon in the murky brown twilight. The church bell began to toll. The sound was a dull, metallic clang that fought a losing battle against the wind. It was a mournful sound for a wedding, heavy and reluctant, as if the iron itself disapproved of the union taking place within. Kai watched the townspeople hurrying toward the double doors, heads bent low against the gale, clutching their hats and bonnets. They were like ants scuttling toward a drop of honey. To them, this was the event of the decade. Silas Harlan, the king of the valley, was taking a queen. To Kai, it looked like a funeral for freedom. Inside those walls, there would be music, the smell of beeswax candles, and the rustle of expensive silk. Outside, the world was raw and violent. The contrast was sharp enough to cut. The white man tried to build boxes to keep the wild out, to create a sterile order, but the wind always found a way through the cracks. He turned away from the window, picking up his hat. He had no business with the wedding. His business was with Marshal Boone, and he hoped the lawman had skipped the ceremony to watch over the town. Kai needed to secure a meeting before the railroad surveyors arrived in force. If he could make the marshal understand that the Crimson Valley was not just land, but a graveyard of kings, perhaps blood could be spared. He descended the narrow stairs, the wood groaning under his boots. The stable below was quiet, save for the nervous stamping of horses sensing the low pressure. A stable boy, a different one from earlier, was pitching hay into a stall. "You going to watch, mister?" the boy asked, leaning on his pitchfork. "They say the bride is wearing lace from France. It cost $300. I have seen enough storms," Kai replied cryptically. "Not the storm," the boy laughed, wiping a smudge of dirt from his nose. "The wedding, Harlan and the Hart girl. It is the biggest thing to happen here since the mine collapsed." Hart. The name snagged in Kai's mind again. A burr he could not brush off. He pushed out into the street, intending to head straight for the marshal's office. But the wind had other ideas. It gusted down the alleyway, nearly tearing his hat from his head, forcing him to lean into it, altering his path. He found himself pushed toward the boardwalk that ran along the side of the church. The heavy oak doors of the church swung open just as he approached. The ceremony must have ended. The organ music swelled, loud and triumphant, spilling out into the dirty street. A crowd of well-wishers spilled out first, forming a gauntlet of cheering shadows. And then, the couple emerged. Silas Harlan looked victorious. He stood tall, his chest puffed out in his fine suit, a white flower pinned to his lapel. He raised a hand to the crowd, soaking in their adoration like a lizard soaking in the sun. But Kai did not look at Silas. His gaze was magnetized to the woman at his side, Lily Hart. She was a vision of spectral white in the gloom. Her dress was indeed magnificent, a cascade of lace and satin that seemed too heavy for her slender frame. The wind caught her veil, whipping it around her head like a frantic ghost. Sand pelted the hem of her pristine gown, staining the white fabric with the red earth of the territory within seconds. She was looking down, watching her feet as if navigating a precipice. Then, as if sensing a gaze that carried more weight than the casual curiosity of the townsfolk, she looked up. Kai stopped. His boots seemed to root into the boardwalk. The distance between them was perhaps 20 feet, occupied by wind and noise. But in that instant, the years collapsed. The face was older, the features refined by womanhood. The soft cheeks of childhood had given way to high, elegant cheekbones. The eyes, however, were unchanged. They were the color of a storm-washed sky, gray and deep and full of a terrifying intelligence. She looked at him, and the polite, frozen smile she had been wearing shattered. Her steps faltered. She stopped dead in the middle of the boardwalk, causing the people behind her to stumble. Kai saw the recognition hit her. It was not a slow dawning. It was a lightning strike. Her hand went to her throat, her fingers clutching the diamond necklace Silas had likely placed there. But her eyes were searching for a leather cord and a turquoise stone that was no longer there. He should turn away. He should tip his hat and vanish into the dust. He was a warrior of the Navajo, a man who had walked through fire and silence. He did not belong in this tableau of wealthy desperation. But he could not move. Lily pulled her arm from Silas's grasp. It was a sudden, sharp movement that surprised the groom. Before Silas could react, before the crowd could understand what was happening, she stepped off the boardwalk and into the dirt of the street, moving toward the shadow where Kai stood. The wind tore at her veil, ripping it from her hair. It flew away into the darkness like a captured bird set free. She did not even turn her head to watch it go. She stopped 2 paces from him. The dust swirled around them, creating a private wall of grit that muffled the cheers of the crowd. She looked up at him, her chest heaving, her eyes searching his face, mapping the scars and the lines that time had drawn there. "You don't remember me, do you?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling, barely audible over the wind, but it carried the weight of 1,000 silent prayers. Kai looked down at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had seen in the box canyon when the floodwaters rose, but beneath the fear, There was steel. She took a step closer, invading his personal space, ignoring the propriety that a married woman should maintain. Her eyes locked onto his dark ones. "I was the girl you left behind. Navajo warrior," she breathed. The words struck him like physical blows. "The girl you left behind." It was an accusation and a plea all at once. "I remember," Kai said, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. "I remember the rain and the blue stone." A sob caught in her throat, a small, wounded sound. "I waited," she said, the words rushing out now. "For years, I watched the horizon. I thought you might come back. I thought—" "I could not come back," Kai said, his tone hardening defensively. "Your people made that clear. A gun butt to the temple is a message that does not need translation." "My father is dead," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The world has changed. Kai, everything has changed. But I never forgot. I kept the memory of you like a secret. It was the only thing that felt real." Suddenly, a hand clamped onto Lily's upper arm. It was a grip of iron, possessed and painful. Silas Harlan was there, his face a mask of jovial concern that did not quite cover the flash of fury in his eyes. "My dear," Silas said, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, though it held a razor's edge. "You are overcome. The emotion of the day, the storm. It is too much for a delicate constitution." He pulled her back, forcibly putting distance between her and the Navajo. Lily winced, her body stiffening, but she did not struggle. She knew the cost of a scene here. Silas turned his gaze to Kai. The fake smile was back, but his eyes were cold, dead things. "You again," Silas said smoothly. "You seem to have a habit of appearing where you are not wanted. My bride is confused. She mistakes you for someone else, I am sure." "There is no mistake," Kai said, his hand resting instinctively near the knife at his belt. "Oh, I think there is," Silas murmured, stepping in front of Lily, blocking Kai's view of her. "She is a Harlan now. She belongs to the future of this valley, not its savage past. I suggest you move along. Warrior, Red Rock does not need any more trouble from her old friends." Silas began to turn, dragging Lily with him back toward the safety of the boardwalk and the waiting carriage. But Lily dug her heels into the dirt. "For a second, just a second." She resisted. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto Kai's one last time. The desperation in them was naked now, stripped of all pretense. "He bought the debt," she whispered, the words hurried and frantic, meant only for Kai. $5,000. My brother, Jamie. Silas said he would throw us off the land. He said Jamie would starve." Silas jerked her arm, harder this time. "Lily," he snapped, his patience evaporating. "He wants the water," she gasped out, her voice breaking as she was pulled away. "He wants it all. The ranch, the canyon. He owns me, Kai. He bought me to get to the land." Kai stood frozen as Silas manhandled her toward the carriage. The groom practically threw his new bride into the velvet interior before climbing in after her. The driver cracked his whip, and the horses lurched forward, pulling the carriage away into the swirling dust. The crowd cheered again, oblivious to the drama that had just played out in the shadows. They saw a wealthy man helping his swooning bride. They did not see the shekels. Kai remained standing in the street as the wind whipped his hair across his face. The revelation settled over him. Heavy and cold, it was not just a marriage. It was a siege. Silas Harlan had not just bought a wife. He had bought the key to the entire territory. The Hart Ranch bordered the Crimson Valley. By marrying Lily. Silas had bypassed the need for government treaties or war. He had simply purchased the deed to the gateway. He would use the Heartland as a staging ground to blast through the sacred rocks of the Navajo. And Lily. Kai looked at his hand. He could still feel the phantom warmth of her presence, the scent of lavender water and fear that clung to the air where she had stood. She had sacrificed herself. She had walked into the cage to save her brother, to save her family's legacy. I was the girl you left behind. The guilt that had been dormant for 10 years woke up and clawed at his chest. He had left her once because he had no choice. He had been a boy, outnumbered and unarmed, but he was not a boy anymore. He watched the tail lights of the carriage disappear into the storm. The logical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive as a scout, told him to walk away. This was a white man's mess, a contract between white people. If he interfered, he would bring the wrath of the United States Army down on his tribe. He should ride to the marshal, file his protest about the canyon, and leave. He turned on his heel and began to walk toward the livery stable. He would get his horse. He would ride out. He took 10 steps. Then he stopped. The image of her eyes burned in his mind. Not the eyes of the child, but the eyes of the woman who had looked at him with a terrifying mixture of shame and hope. She had stepped away from her husband to speak to him. She had risked a beating, or worse, to tell him the truth. "You don't remember me, do you?" "I remember," Kai whispered to the empty street. He turned back, looking toward the direction the carriage had gone. The storm was raging harder now, obliterating the tracks. But Kai did not need tracks to know where Silas Harlan lived. He was a negotiator. That was what the elders had sent him to be. But Silas Harlan had just declared war, even if he did not know it yet. He had taken a hostage. Kai Nez touched the handle of his knife. The cold metal was grounding. He would not leave town tonight. He would find Marshal Boone. Yes. But he would also find out everything there was to know about the debt of $5,000. And the boy named Jamie Hart. The girl he had left behind was gone. But the woman she had become was calling out from the dark. And this time, the Navajo warrior was not going to turn his back. The celebration at the Harlan Ranch was a spectacle that the Arizona Territory would talk about for years. It was a display of wealth so aggressive it felt like a challenge to the desert itself. The main house, a sprawling structure of timber and stone, was ablaze with the light of 300 beeswax candles. Outside, despite the lingering gusts of the storm, bonfires roared, casting long, dancing shadows against the barn walls where the fiddlers played. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the smell of roasted beef, expensive tobacco, and the cloying scent of perfume. Silas Harlan stood at the head of the long table, a crystal goblet of whiskey in his hand. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with the intoxication of triumph. He did not look like a man in love. He looked like a general who had just annexed a new province. "To the Union," Silas bellowed, his voice carrying over the din of conversation. "Not just of a man and a woman, but of the past and the future. To the Hart Ranch and to the Harlan Empire. May they be one and the same forever." The guests cheered, raising their glasses. Among them were cattle barons, local politicians, and the men who intended to lay steel rails across the spine of the land. Lily Harlan, formerly Hart, sat beside him. She was a statue carved from ice. Her hands were folded in her lap, gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. She wore the smile of a doll, painted on and lifeless. Every time Silas touched her a hand on her shoulder, a possessive pat on her arm, she did not flinch, but the light in her eyes dimmed a fraction more. She felt like a prize heifer that had been bought at auction, washed, ribbons tied to its horns, and displayed for the envy of the neighbors. At the far end of the table sat Jamie Hart. Her brother was only 19, but tonight he looked like an old man. He was slumped in his chair, staring into his untouched plate. He knew what this marriage was. He knew he was the reason for it. Every time he looked at his sister, shame burned his face crimson. Late in the evening, while Silas was busy explaining the finer points of cattle breeding to a captive audience, Jamie slipped to Lily's side. "Lil," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears and too much wine. "I am sorry. I should have stopped it. I should have fought him." "Hush, Jamie," Lily said softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Her voice was steady, the steel returning to her spine. "You keep your voice down. We did what we had to do. You still have a home. That is what matters." "But at what cost?" Jamie hissed, looking at Silas with a flash of hatred. "He looks at you like he owns you. He looks at the land the same way. Go to bed, Jamie," she commanded gently. "Tomorrow is a new day. We survive. That is what hearts do." But as Jamie stumbled away and Silas returned to wrap a heavy arm around her waist, pulling her against his side, Lily looked out the window toward the darkness of the mesa. Somewhere out there, in the wind and the rock, was a man who had looked at her not as a possession, but as a soul. The next morning broke with a deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a brilliant, hard blue. The air smelled of wet sagebrush and dust. Lily told Silas she wished to go to the small chapel on the edge of town to give thanks for their union. It was a lie that fed his ego, so he allowed it. Though he insisted the carriage driver take her, she managed to dismiss the driver at the general store, claiming she wanted to walk the last quarter-mile to clear her head. She did not go to the chapel. Instead, she gathered her skirts and slipped down a narrow game trail that led toward the creek, a ribbon of green cottonwoods that marked the boundary between the town and the open desert. Kainez was there. He was watering his horse, standing knee-deep in the rushing water, shirtless, washing the dust of the previous day from his skin. He heard her approach long before he saw her. The snap of a dry twig was as loud as a gunshot to his ears. He turned, water dripping from his chest and arms. He did not reach for his weapon. He knew that tread. Lily stopped on the bank. She was breathless, her cheeks flushed from the walk and the terror of being caught. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the gurgling of the creek and the call of a hawk circling high above. "You should not be here," Kai said. His voice was low, vibrating in the quiet air. "I had to see you," Lily replied. She stepped closer to the water's edge. "Yesterday, in the street, I needed you to know that I did not choose this." "I know," Kai said. He waded out of the water, moving with a fluid grace. He picked up his shirt from a rock but did not put it on immediately. I saw his eyes. A man does not look at a partner that way. He looks at a conquest. "It is worse than that," Lily said, her voice trembling. She looked over her shoulder, checking the ridge for observers. "Kai, it is not just the ranch. Last night, Silas was drinking. He was talking to a man from the railroad company. They were looking at maps." Kai stiffened. "What maps?" "They are going to merge the heartland with his," Lily explained, the words rushing out. "But the deed. I saw the papers on his desk this morning before he woke up. The survey lines go past our grazing land. They cut straight through the Crimson Valley." "The valley is Navajo land," Kai said, his jaw tightening. "It is protected by treaty." "Silas calls it unclaimed wilderness," Lily said. "He plans to petition the territorial governor to declare it abandoned. He says the Navajo only use it for ceremonies, so it is not occupied. Once he owns the deed to the heartland, he controls the water access. He will choke off the valley. Kai, he will dry you out until you have to leave, and then the railroad will blast through the canyon." The revelation hit Kai with the force of a physical blow. It was not just greed. It was erasure. Silas Harlan intended to use Lily's inheritance as a weapon to destroy Kai's people. The wind picked up, blowing a strand of Lily's hair across her face. Without thinking, Kai reached out. His hand, calloused and dark, brushed against the pale skin of her cheek as he tucked the hair behind her ear. The touch was electric. Lily gasped softly, leaning into his palm. They stood there, suspended in time. The barrier between their worlds, the white society and the indigenous tribe, the married woman and the warrior, thinned until it was almost transparent. Kai could smell the lavender soap she used, and beneath it, the warm, living scent of her skin. He looked at her lips, parted slightly, and felt a pull so strong it was almost painful. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to take her and drive away from this poisoned town, to disappear into the mountains where no railroad could follow. He leaned in. Lily's eyes fluttered closed, her breath hitching, but the sound of a distant train whistle shattered the moment. It was a shrill, mechanical scream that reminded them of reality. Kai pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He stepped away, picking up his shirt and pulling it on, covering the scars on his chest. "You must go back," he said, his voice rough. "If he finds you here." "I do not care," Lily said, though tears were welling in her eyes. "I cannot bear it. Kai, being in that house, being his, you must," Kai said firmly. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip gentle but unyielding. "Listen to me. Lily, you are the only one inside his walls. You are the eyes he does not suspect. If we are to stop him, if we are to save the valley and your brother, I need you to be strong. I need you to survive him." "For how long?" she whispered. "Until I can break his hold," Kai promised. "I will not let him take the valley, and I will not let him destroy you." An hour later, Kai walked into the office of Marshal Boone. The office was stiflingly hot, smelling of stale coffee and gun oil. Marshal Boone sat behind his desk, looking tired. He was a man of 50, with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too many men die for too little reason. Sitting opposite him was a man in a pinstriped suit, Mr. Thorpe, the representative from the railroad. Thorpe looked out of place in the dusty office, holding a handkerchief to his nose as if the very air of Red Rock offended him. "Kai," the marshal nodded, though he did not smile. "I told you I would hear you out. This is Mr. Thorpe." "I know who he is," Kai said. He did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, radiating a quiet, dangerous energy. "I know what he wants." "We want progress. Mr. Nez," Thorpe said, his voice nasal and dismissive. "The railroad brings commerce. It brings civilization. Your civilization requires the destruction of my people's burial grounds," Kai said. "The Crimson Valley is sacred. We do not build on the bones of your ancestors. Do not build on ours." Thorpe sighed, dusting imaginary lint from his sleeve. "Mr. Nez, let us be reasonable. We have looked at the surveys. The southern route around the mesa adds 40 miles of track. That is an expense the investors will not bear. The valley is the only logical path." "So, logic does not supersede the treaty," Kai argued. "The Treaty of 1868 defines our borders. Borders are fluid things," Thorpe said with a cold smile. "We are willing to offer compensation. The company has authorized me to offer $200 to the tribe for relocation costs. And we can petition the agency to grant you land further north. It is dry. Yes, but it is vast." "You offer pennies for a cathedral," Kai said, his voice rising. "And the land north is alkali flats. Nothing grows there. You are telling us to go there and die." Marshal Boone cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Kai, look, Mr. Harlan has a lot of pull in the capital. If he says the valley is necessary for the economic health of the territory, then the law serves the money, not the people," Kai asked, looking directly at the marshal. "Is that what the badge means now? Boone?" Boone flinched. He looked down at his desk. "It means I have to keep the peace. Kai." "And if the railroad comes through and your people are standing on the tracks, I cannot stop the train." "Then tell the train to stop," Kai said, "because we will not move." Thorpe stood up, snapping his briefcase shut. "Then I suppose we are done here. If you will not listen to reason, perhaps you will listen to the cavalry. Mr. Harlan assures me the army can be persuaded to protect American interests." Kai looked at the man with disdain. "You call it interest. We call it theft." He turned and walked out, leaving the silence heavy in the room. He had tried words. He had tried the white man's way. It had failed, just as he knew it would. Lily returned to the ranch just as the sun was setting. The house was quiet, the servants moving like ghosts in the corridors. She hurried up the stairs to her room, hoping to change her dusty shoes before supper, but when she opened the door, Silas was sitting in the armchair by the window. He was smoking a cigar, the smoke curling around his head like a wreath. He did not look up as she entered. "You were gone a long time," Silas said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "For a prayer." I went for a walk afterwards," Lily stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The air was nice after the storm." Silas stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately. He crossed the room and stood before her. He reached out and picked a small burr from the hem of her dress, a burr that only grew near the creek beds. "Down by the water?" Silas asked. He crushed the burr between his thumb and forefinger. "It is dangerous down there. Lily, snakes, coyotes, savages." He looked at her then, and the mask slipped. His eyes were burning with a cold, possessive rage. He reached out and grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her jaw hard enough to bruise. "You think I do not know?" he hissed. "You think I did not see the way you looked at him in the street, that red-skin filth?" "Silas, you are hurting me," Lily gasped, trying to pull away, but his grip was iron. "Good," he whispered. "Pain helps memory. You are my wife. Lily, you bear my name. You live in my house. If you ever shame me by going near him again, if you ever let that savage touch you—" He leaned in close, his breath smelling of tobacco and whiskey. "I will not just kill him. I will make sure your brother watches while I burn this ranch to the ground. Jamie is soft. Lily, he would not survive a week in prison. And I have many friends who are judges." He released her abruptly. Shoving her back, she stumbled, catching herself on the bedpost. "Wash your face," Silas commanded, turning his back on her to adjust his cuffs. "We have guests for dinner. And smile, my dear. You are the happiest woman in the territory." That night, Kai Nez stood on the highest ridge overlooking the valley. The wind whipped at his hair, cold and sharp. Below him, the lights of Red Rock flickered like dying stars. Further out, the lights of the Harlan Ranch burned steady and arrogant. Behind him, the darkness of the Crimson Valley stretched out, silent and ancient. Old Hushke, the tribal elder, sat by a small fire nearby, wrapping his blanket tighter around his frail shoulders. "You have the look of a man walking two paths," Hushke said, his voice cracking like dry parchment. "The heart is a heavy burden for a warrior. They will not stop. Grandfather," Kai said, not turning around. "They want the valley. Harlan wants it all." "And the woman?" Hushke asked. "Does he want her, or does he want what she brings?" "He wants to break her," Kai said, "just as he wants to break us." "You cannot save everyone, Kai," the old man warned. "If you fight for the woman, you may lose the land. If you fight for the land, the woman may fall. To fight the white man is to fight the tide." Kai looked up at the moon, a sliver of bone in the vast sky. He remembered the feel of Lily's skin against his hand. He remembered the fear in her eyes, and the courage she had summoned to warn him. "Then I will build a dam," Kai said. "I will not let the tide take her, and I will not let it take this valley." He turned to the elder, his face set in stone. "Gather the young men tomorrow." Kai said, "We do not attack, not yet, but we will watch, and when Silas Harlan makes his move, we will be the rock that breaks his wheel." He looked back one last time at the distant lights of the ranch, where Lily was trapped in a cage of gold and fear. "I am coming," he whispered into the wind. "Hold on, Lily, I am coming." The smoke rose first, a dark, oily pillar staining the pristine azure of the Arizona sky from the ridge. Kai Nez watched it curl upwards, twisting like a black snake. It was not a brush fire. Sagebrush burned white and fast. This was pitch and timber. It was a summer camp of the Navajo, a seasonal grazing outpost near the southern rim of the canyon. Kai gripped the reins of his paint horse until his knuckles turned the color of old parchment. He knew this tactic. It was the oldest trick in the cavalry handbook, now repurposed by a man who fought with a checkbook instead of a saber. Burn the food, scatter the herds, and then blame the victims for their own starvation. Down in Red Rock, the narrative was already being spun. Silas Harlan had sent riders into town at noon, shouting about stolen cattle and savage retribution. By sunset, the whiskey-soaked patrons of the saloon would be clamoring for the army to intervene. By morning, the surveyor's stakes would be driven into the charred earth of his people's history. But Silas had made a mistake. He assumed his enemies were only outside his gates. He did not realize that the rot had already begun inside his own house. In the suffocating luxury of the Harlan study, Jamie Hart was sweating. The heavy velvet drapes were drawn against the afternoon sun, making the room feel like a tomb. Jamie stood by the massive oak desk, his hands trembling as he turned the pages of the leather-bound ledger. He had only meant to look for the deed to the Hart Ranch, to see if there was any legal loophole to save his sister. What he found instead was a roadmap of corruption that made his stomach churn. The numbers did not add up. Or rather, they added up too perfectly. There were entries for 2,000 head of cattle lost to predators and theft in the last quarter alone, a number that was impossible. There were payments listed to a Mr. Thorpe of the railroad company that exceeded the annual income of most honest ranchers. And there, in stark black ink, were the insurance claims. Silas was claiming losses for herds that never existed, paid for by policies underwritten by the very railroad he was courting. "Interesting reading, isn't it?" The voice came from the doorway, smooth and cold as a river stone. Jamie jumped, nearly dropping the heavy book. Silas Harlan stood there, leaning against the doorframe, picking his teeth with a silver toothpick. He had entered silently, a predator's talent. I was looking for paper," Jamie stammered, his face draining of color. "To write a letter to our aunt in St. Louis." Silas walked into the room, the floorboards creaking under his polished boots. He stopped in front of the desk, looking down at the open ledger, then up at the terrified young man. "You are a poor liar, Jamie," Silas said softly, "and an even poorer accountant. Do you know what happens to cattle that wander where they do not belong? They get cut from the herd." Silas reached out and slammed the ledger shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I saved you," Silas hissed, his face suddenly inches from Jamie's. "I bought your debt. I put clothes on your back." "And this is how you repay me, by sniffing around my private affairs like a mongrel dog?" "You are stealing," Jamie whispered, finding a shred of courage in his fear. "You are burning the land and blaming the Navajo. I saw the payments for the kerosene." Silas's eyes went dead. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Get off my property. If I see you on this land after sunset, I will have the marshal arrest you for embezzlement. I will paint you as a thief who stole from his own sister's husband. Who do you think they will believe, the wealthy benefactor, or the boy who could not run a ranch?" Jamie scrambled back, knocking over a chair, and fled the room. He ran through the kitchen, out the back door, and didn't stop until he reached the stables where Lily was checking on her mare. "We have to go," Jamie gasped, grabbing her arm. "Now. He knows. Lily, he knows I saw the books." Lily looked at her brother's wild eyes and saw the truth. The waiting game was over. "The books. Evidence," Jamie panted. "Fraud. Insurance swindles. Enough to hang him, or at least ruin him. But he will kill me before I can get to a judge outside this county." Lily made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. She grabbed a saddlebag. "Go to the North Ridge. Wait by the split rock. Do not stop for anyone." "Where are you going?" "To find the only man who can get us out of here alive," she said. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the desert in violent shades of orange and purple. When Kai saw them, he was waiting near the arroyo, having received a frantic signal from the stable boy he had bribed. Lily rode like she had been born in the saddle, her white dress replaced by a riding habit of dark wool, her hair flying loose. Jamie trailed behind her, looking back over his shoulder every few seconds. "He is coming!" Lily shouted over the wind as she pulled her horse up beside Kai. "Silas sent his riders. They are 10 minutes behind us." Kai wasted no words. He saw the cloud of dust rising in the east, moving fast. Silas's hired guns. They were on fresh horses, and they were armed for a manhunt. "We cannot make the canyon before they catch us," Kai said, assessing the terrain. "Not in the open." He looked to the west. The sky there was bruising, turning a sickly yellow-brown. The wind had picked up, carrying the taste of copper and grit. A haboob, a massive wall of sand, was rolling in from the salt flats. To a white man, it was a disaster. To a Navajo scout, it was cover. "Follow me," Kai commanded. "Into the storm." "Are you mad?" Jamie cried. "We will be blinded." "Exactly," Kai said. "And so will they." He kicked his horse into a gallop. heading straight for the wall of dust. Lily did not hesitate. She spurred her mare, falling in behind him. They hit the storm wall a minute later. The world vanished. The sun was blotted out, replaced by a twilight of swirling red choking dust. The wind roared like a living thing, stinging exposed skin and filling eyes and mouths with grit. Visibility dropped to the length of a horse's neck. "Keep your hand on my horse's flank," Kai shouted to Lily. "Do not let go." They rode blind, guided only by Kai's instinct and his memory of the land. He knew where the deep ravines lay, where the ground turned to treacherous shale that would break a horse's leg. He led them off the main trail, weaving through a labyrinth of standing rocks that broke the wind. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit, the shouts of men. The crack of gunshots fired blindly faded into the roar of the gale. Silas's men were city fighters. They would hunker down or get lost. Kainez was home. They rode for 2 hours in the howling dark until the terrain began to rise. The wind lost some of its bite as they entered the shelter of the high cliffs. Kai led them up a narrow, twisting goat path that no wagon could follow, finally stopping before the mouth of a shallow cave hidden behind a screen of mesquite bushes. "Dismount," Kai ordered. "We wait here until the wind dies." They stumbled into the cave, dragging the tack and saddlebags. The horses were hobbled in the back where the ceiling was high. Jamie collapsed in the corner, utterly spent. The adrenaline had left him, replaced by the crushing weight of exhaustion. Within minutes, the boy was asleep, curled into a ball against the stone wall. Kai struck a match. The small flame flared, illuminating the cave. He built a small fire using dried sage and driftwood he kept cached there. It was a smokeless fire, small and hot. Lily sat by the fire, shivering uncontrollably. The desert temperature had plummeted with the storm, and the adrenaline crash left her freezing. Her riding coat was thin, and the dust coated her skin like a second layer. Kai watched her for a moment. He saw the tremor in her hands, the blueness of her lips. He took off his heavy leather duster, lined with sheepskin, and moved to her side. "Put this on," he said gently. Lily looked up at him. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes wide and luminous in the firelight. She took the coat, pulling it around her shoulders, but she continued to shiver. The cold was deep in her bones. Kai hesitated for only a second. The rules of her world forbade what he was about to do, but the rules of survival dictated it. He sat down next to her, close enough that their arms touched. Then, he put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her into him. "Share the heat," he murmured. "It is the only way." Lily stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted against him. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the scent of rain, leather, and wood smoke that was uniquely him. "I thought we were dead," she whispered. "When the dust hit, I could not see anything." "You did not need to see," Kai said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "You only needed to trust." "I do trust you," she said. She pulled back slightly to look at him. The firelight danced in her eyes, reflecting the orange flames. "I trusted you 10 years ago in the rain. I trust you now in the dust." The distance between them was negligible. Kai looked at her mouth, then at her eyes. The storm outside howled like a frustrated beast, but inside the circle of firelight, the world narrowed down to 2 people. "You should not be here, Lily," Kai said, his voice thick with regret. "You are a married woman. If they find us—" "I am not married," she said fiercely. "I was sold. There is a difference, and I am done being a transaction." She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his cheek. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, rough with stubble. "You kept the amulet." Kai reached into his tunic and pulled out the leather cord. The turquoise stone, polished by years of wear, rested against his skin. "It reminds me of the sky," he said, echoing her words from a decade ago. Lily let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. She leaned in. This time, there was no train whistle to interrupt them. There was no hesitation born of propriety. He kissed her. It was not the rough, demanding kiss of a man like Silas. It was slow, terrified and desperate. It tasted of salt and dust and longing. Kai's hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. Lily clung to him, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. For a long time, they just held each other, the kiss breaking only for breath, forehead resting against forehead. The heat between them had nothing to do with the fire. It was the heat of two lonesome stars finally colliding. They did not go further. The presence of her sleeping brother and the weight of their situation kept them grounded. But as they settled down to sleep, Kai sat with his back to the wall, and Lily slept with her head on his chest, his arm a protective iron band around her. Dawn brought a silence so profound it hurt the ears. The wind had died, leaving the desert scrubbed clean and new. Kai woke first. The weight of Lily against him was a sweet torture. He looked down at her sleeping face, softer now in repose, and felt a spike of guilt sharp enough to pierce his heart. He had crossed the line. He had touched the wife of his enemy. In the eyes of the law, he was now a kidnapper and an adulterer. He had endangered his tribe even more by bringing her here. But then Lily stirred. She opened her eyes, blinking against the morning light, and looked up at him. There was no regret in her gaze, only a calm, terrifying certainty. "Good morning," she whispered. "We have to move," Kai said, his voice gruff as he pulled away, needing to create distance to think clearly. "The tracks will be covered by the sand, but Silas will have scouts out on the perimeter." They woke Jamie, who groaned and rubbed his stiff limbs. A breakfast of dried venison and water was eaten in haste. "Where do we go?" Jamie asked, looking at the vast, empty landscape. "We cannot go back to Red Rock, not yet. We go home," Kai said. "To the ranch?" Jamie asked, confused. "No," Kai replied, mounting his horse. "To my home, the valley." The ride into the Crimson Valley was a revelation for the two white refugees. They expected a bandit camp, something rough and temporary. What they found was a civilization. The valley opened up like a green jewel. A river cut through the center, lined with ancient cottonwoods and fields of corn and squash. Hogan's traditional dwellings of logs and earth were spaced evenly along the water. Smoke rose lazily from smoke holes. Children were running races near the cornfields, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Women sat in circles, weaving blankets with geometric patterns that told stories of the stars and the mountains. It was peaceful. It was orderly. It was beautiful. Lily rode in silence, her eyes wide. "They told us you were savages," she murmured. "They said you lived like wolves." "It is easier to take land from wolves than from farmers," Kai said grimly. They were met by Hashke and a dozen warriors. The men looked at the white strangers with suspicion, hands hovering near rifles. "You bring trouble." "Kainez," Hashke said, his face a map of wrinkles and worry. "Fire follows these two. Fire was coming anyway." "Grandfather," Kai said, dismounting and helping Lily down. "This is the woman who warned us, and this is her brother. They carry the weapon that can defeat Silas Harlan without a bullet." Jamie patted the saddlebag containing the ledger. "I have his books." "Sir, I can prove he is a thief and a liar." Hashke looked at the boy, then at Lily. He saw the way she stood close to Kai, not out of fear, but out of belonging. The old man's eyes softened imperceptibly. "The enemy of my enemy is my guest," Hashke decided. "Feed them. Hide the horses." That afternoon, a war council was held, but not one of arrows and war paint. It was a council of law. Kai, Lily, Jamie, and Hashke sat in the central hogan. "We cannot just run," Lily said, her voice firm. "Silas will hunt us forever, and he will destroy this valley to get to us." "We need the law," Kai said. "Marshal Boone is a man of the middle, but he respects paper. If we show him the ledger, if we show him the proof of the insurance fraud and the bribes to the railroad surveyor, he will have to act." "Boone is afraid of Silas," Jamie countered. "Everyone is—" "Boone is afraid of chaos," Kai corrected. "Silas is creating chaos. If we give Boone a way to stop it, that makes him a hero. He will take it." "We need to get this to the district judge in Prescott," Lily said. but we cannot make it there without supplies, and Silas will be watching the roads." "We bring the judge to us," Kai said. "Or, rather, we bring the evidence to Red Rock in such a way that the whole town sees it. We force Boone's hand." They formulated a plan. It was dangerous. It required them to stop hiding and walk back into the lion's mouth, but it was the only way to end it. Back at the Harlan Ranch, the mood was apocalyptic. Silas Harlan stood on his porch, staring at the empty horizon. His best tracker had just returned, exhausted and empty-handed. The storm had wiped the desert clean. But then, a second rider galloped in. It was a man Silas had paid to watch the perimeter of the Navajo lands. "Mr. Harlan!" the man shouted, sliding off his horse. "I saw them, through the field glasses." Just for a second before they dipped into the canyon. "Who?" Silas demanded, gripping the railing. "The boy. And the missus. They were riding with an Indian. That scout. Kainez." Silas went very still. The rage that filled him was cold and absolute. It was not just that his wife had run away. It was that she had run to him. The savage. The obstacle. It was the ultimate insult. It was a theft of his property and his pride. "She has gone to the blanket," Silas whispered, the racial slur tasting like bile. "She has betrayed her race and her husband." He turned to his foreman, a man with a scar across his nose and no conscience to speak of. "Send a telegram to the fort," Silas commanded. "Tell the colonel that the Navajo have raided my ranch. Tell him they have kidnapped a white woman and a boy. Tell him I have reason to believe they are being held hostage in the Crimson Valley." "You want the cavalry?" the foreman asked. "I want a massacre," Silas said. "I want that valley burned to ash. And when the smoke clears, I want Kainez's head on a pike." He looked back toward the red rocks in the distance. "You wanted a war, warrior," Silas said to the empty air. "Now you have one." The arrival of the United States cavalry in Red Rock changed the texture of the air itself. It became heavier, charged with the metallic scent of carbines and the nervous sweat of men preparing for violence. Colonel Holloway, a man with a face carved from granite and a mustache waxed to needlepoints, sat in the commandeered office of the marshal, tapping a gloved finger against a stack of documents. Opposite him sat Silas Harlan. The cattle baron looked haggard. The pristine suit was gone, replaced by dusty riding clothes. There was a manic gleam in his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and unraveling sanity. "You are certain of this intelligence, Mr. Harlan?" the colonel asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "I saw them myself, Colonel." Silas lied, leaning forward, his hands gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. "Savages. A war party of at least 20. They descended on my ranch like locusts. They burned the feed store, slaughtered the livestock, and took my wife and her young brother. They dragged them toward the Crimson Valley." He pushed a piece of paper across the desk. It was a forgery, crafted in haste but damning in its content a fake report from a ranch hand claiming to have witnessed the abduction. "They are demanding a ransom," Silas continued, his voice trembling with a performance of grief. "But not money. They want the valley. They want the railroad stopped. If we do not strike now, Colonel, they will kill her. They are savages. They do not know mercy." The colonel frowned, looking at the map on the wall. "My orders are to keep the peace. Harlan, not to start a war. There is no peace to keep," Silas shouted, slamming his hand down. "They have taken a white woman, an American citizen. If the army does not act, I will lead every able-bodied man in this town to turn that valley into a graveyard. And the blood will be on your hands." The colonel stiffened. The threat of a civilian militia running amok was a headache he did not need. "Very well. We ride at dawn. We will secure the valley." Silas leaned back, a dark satisfaction settling over his features. He had wound the clockwork of war. Now he just had to watch it strike. But the clockwork jammed an hour later. The main street of Red Rock fell silent as 3 riders emerged from the desert haze. They did not sneak in through the back alleys. They rode down the center of the thoroughfare, heads high, defying the dust and the stares of the townsfolk. Kai Nez rode in the center, his paint horse stepping rhythmically. To his left was Lily Harlan, her dark riding habit dusty but her back straight as a steel rod. To his right was Jamie Hart, clutching a heavy leather ledger to his chest like a shield. They rode straight to the marshal's office, where Colonel Holloway and Silas were just emerging. The sight of them froze the street. Silas stopped mid-step, his face draining of color. He looked as if he were seeing ghosts. "Marshal Boone!" Kai's voice rang out, clear and authoritative, cutting through the wind. "We bring no weapons. We bring only the truth." Marshal Boone stepped out onto the boardwalk, his hand resting on his gun belt. He looked from Silas to Kai, his eyes narrowing. "Get down from there, son," Boone said, "before someone gets itchy fingers." They dismounted. Lily walked straight up to the colonel, ignoring her husband completely. "Colonel," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking slightly. "I am Lily Harlan, and I was not kidnapped. I fled my home to escape a monster." A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Silas stepped forward, his face twisting. "She is delirious," he barked. "The savages have turned her mind. Seize them." "Stay back," Jamie shouted, stepping in front of his sister. He slammed the ledger onto a rain barrel. "It is all in here, the cattle counts, the insurance claims, the payments to the surveyor to fake the lines." Boone stepped forward, picking up the book. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the columns of numbers. The crowd pressed in, sensing the shift in power. 2,000 heads died of thirst, Boone read aloud, his brow furrowing. "Silas, you have not had 2,000 heads in that range in 5 years." "It is a forgery!" Silas screamed, saliva flying from his lips. "That boy is a thief. He stole my books and doctored them." "And the bridge?" Kai asked quietly. He looked directly at Silas. "The bridge over the canyon. The one you insured for triple its value last week." Silas went rigid. "We know," Kai said to the crowd. "He plans to destroy the bridge to bankrupt the current investors so he can buy the shares for pennies. And he plans to blame it on my people to justify a massacre." The colonel looked at Silas, his expression shifting from annoyance to suspicion. "Is this true, Harlan?" Silas looked around. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the townspeople. He saw the law closing in. The mask of the respectable businessman crumbled, revealing the cornered animal beneath. "You listen to a savage over me?" Silas spat. "I built this town, I own this town." "You own nothing," Lily said, her voice cutting like a knife. "The marriage was a sham. Silas, the debt you bought was fraudulent. It is over." For a second, Silas looked as if he might draw his pistol. But then, a strange, cold calm settled over him. He smiled, a terrifying expression that did not reach his eyes. "Over," he whispered. "No, my dear, the train has not even arrived yet." He turned and shoved a bystander into the colonel, creating a moment of chaos. In the confusion, 3 men hired guns who had been lurking in the alley opened fire, not at Kai, but into the air. The horses panicked. The crowd screamed and scattered. Dust filled the air. "Grab them!" Silas roared at his men. It was a coordinated extraction. Before Kai could reach Lily, the butt of a rifle slammed into the back of his head. The world spun into darkness. He heard Jamie scream, then the sound of galloping hooves fading into the distance. When Kai woke, the taste of copper was in his mouth. He was lying on the floor of the marshal's office. Hashke was wiping his face with a wet cloth, and Boone was pacing the floor, cursing vividly. "They are gone," Boone said, seeing Kai's eyes open. "He took them. He took Lily and the boy." Kai sat up, the room tilting violently. "Where?" Boone pointed to a piece of paper pinned to the doorframe with a hunting knife. "Noon, the canyon bridge. Come alone, Navajo, or the girl and the boy go down with the wreckage." Kai looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:30. "He is going to blow the bridge," Kai said, struggling to his feet. "He wants to destroy the evidence and the witnesses in one stroke. I have men ready," the colonel said, stepping into the room. "We can storm the canyon." "No," Kai said, gripping the edge of the desk to steady himself. If he sees an army, he will kill them before you get within range. He wants me. It is a suicide mission, Boone warned. It is the only way, Kai said. He checked the load in his revolver. But I will need help. Not an army. Ghosts. He looked at Hashke. The old elder nodded once. We will be the shadows, Hashke said. The canyon was a wound in the earth, 1,000 feet deep. Spanning it was the newly finished trestle bridge, a spider web of timber and iron that looked fragile against the vastness of the sky. The sun was at its zenith, beating down on the rails until they shimmered. The wind howled through the gorge, a sound like 1,000 crying voices. Silas Harlan stood in the center of the bridge. Lily and Jamie were tied to the rails, their backs to the approaching drop. Beside Silas sat a crate of dynamite, wired to a plunger. In the distance, the faint chugging of a steam engine could be heard. The heavy freight train from the east was on schedule. Silas checked his pocket watch. Right on time? He muttered. He looked down at Lily. Her hair was wild, her face pale, but her eyes were burning with hatred. He will come, Lily said. I count on it, Silas replied, and when he does, we will have a lovely reunion before we all say goodbye. At the far end of the bridge, a lone rider appeared. Kai Nez sat on his horse, a silhouette against the blinding sun. He did not gallop. He walked the horse onto the wooden planks, the hooves echoing like drumbeats over the abyss. Stop there, Silas shouted, aiming his revolver at Lily's head. Kai halted. He was 50 yards away. He swung his leg over and dismounted, letting the horse run back to solid ground. He stood alone on the bridge, the wind whipping his long hair. I am here, Silas. Kai called out. Let them go. This is between us. Oh, it is far beyond us now. Silas laughed, the sound manic. Do you hear that is the sound of progress coming to crush you? The train whistle blew. Closer now. The vibrations began to hum through the tracks. You cannot escape this, Kai said, walking slowly forward. His hands held out to show he was not drawing his weapon. The colonel knows. The town knows. Killing us changes nothing. It changes everything, Silas screamed. If I cannot have this land, no one will if I cannot have her. She goes into the dark. Kai's eyes flicked to the cliffs on either side of the canyon. He saw nothing, but he knew. Now! A gunshot cracked from the rocks. The pistol in Silas's hand spun away, struck by a bullet from Boone's sniper rifle 400 yards away. Silas howled in pain, clutching his hand. Now! Kai shouted. He broke into a run, sprinting across the ties. Silas scrambled for the detonator. I will kill us all! From the other side of the canyon, arrows flew, silent, deadly. 2 of Silas's hired men, who had been hiding behind the support beams, fell into the gorge. Kai tackled Silas just as his hand reached the plunger. They crashed onto the wooden deck, rolling dangerously close to the edge. It was a brawl of desperation. Silas was not a fighter, but he possessed the strength of a madman. He clawed at Kai's eyes, biting and kicking. Kai, weakened by the blow to his head, struggled to pin him. The train was rounding the bend. The engineer slammed on the brakes, sparks flying from the wheels, but thousands of tons of steel do not stop instantly. The bridge began to shake violently. Let me go, Silas shrieked. Reaching for the knife in his boot, he slashed out, the blade catching Kai in the shoulder. Blood sprayed, dark and hot. Kai gritted his teeth against the pain. He caught Silas's wrist, twisting it until the bone snapped. Silas dropped the knife, but he threw his weight to the side, trying to roll them both off the bridge. They teetered on the edge, the abyss yawning below. Lily, struggling against her bonds, managed to twist her body. She saw the wire running from the dynamite crate to the blasting caps under the rails. With a cry of effort, she kicked out with both feet, slamming her heels into the connection point. The wire snapped. Silas saw it. The realization that his grand finale had been cut short broke him. He let out a wail of pure despair. He released Kai and lunged for the loose wire, trying to reconnect it with his bare hands. Silas! No! Kai shouted, reaching for him. but Silas's boot slipped on the blood-slicked wood. He flailed, his fingers brushing the wire, missing it by an inch. Momentum carried him over the side. He did not scream as he fell. He simply stared up at them, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he plummeted into the shadows of the canyon. Kai collapsed on the deck, his chest heaving. The train screeched to a halt, the cowcatcher stopping just 10 feet from where Jamie and Lily were tied. The heat from the boiler washed over them. For a moment, there was only the sound of the hissing steam and the wind. Then, Boone and Hashke were there, running onto the bridge. Boone cut Jamie's ropes, while Hashke moved to the dynamite to ensure it was safe. Kai crawled over to Lily. His shoulder was bleeding heavily, soaking his shirt. He used his knife to slice through the ropes binding her wrists. The moment her hands were free, she did not pull away. She lunged at him, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him down so their foreheads touched. She was crying now, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. "You came," she choked out. "You came into the trap." "I told you," Kai rasped, wincing as he tried to sit up. "I remember." He tried to stand, but his legs gave way. The loss of blood and the concussion were taking their toll. He slumped forward, darkness edging his vision. Lily caught him, her hands pressing against the wound on his shoulder to staunch the flow. Her white dress was stained with his blood, creating a stark, violent contrast. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice fierce. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "Do not you dare leave me again, Navajo warrior, not this time." Kai looked up at her. The train hissed above them, a dragon tamed. The bridge still stood. The valley below was safe. "I am not going anywhere," he whispered, his hand covering hers on his chest. "The storm is over. Lily, we are still here." Colonel Holloway walked up, looking over the edge where Silas had vanished. He took off his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the wounded Navajo and the white woman holding him as if he were the most precious thing on earth. "Get a medic," the colonel shouted down the line. "And get a wagon. We have heroes to transport." As the soldiers moved to help, Jamie knelt beside them. He looked older than he had that morning. He placed a hand on Kai's uninjured shoulder. "Thank you," Jamie said simply. Kai nodded, his eyes drifting shut, but he did not let go of Lily's hand, and she did not let go of him. Amidst the smell of coal smoke and blood, the bond that had begun in a rainstorm 10 years ago was finally forged into something unbreakable. The dust from the collapse of Silas Harlan did not settle in a day. It hung over Red Rock for weeks, a metaphorical grit that got into the eyes and teeth of every citizen. The bridge over the canyon still stood, a testament to a disaster averted. But the social structure of the town had been shattered as thoroughly as Silas's body at the bottom of the gorge. The inquiry that followed was not a simple matter of law. It was an autopsy of the town's conscience. A district judge traveled down from Prescott, a stern man with a beard like steel wool and a patience that had been worn thin by decades of frontier foolishness. He set up court in the back room of the saloon. As the church was deemed too small to hold the crowd of curious onlookers, the star witness was not a person, but a book. The leather-bound ledger that Jamie Hart had clutched to his chest like a shield was placed on the judge's table. It was a damning litany of greed. Every page revealed another layer of rot, the bribes paid to the surveyor, the false insurance claims for cattle that never existed, the calculated debts leveraged against struggling neighbors. When the new representative from the railroad arrived, a pragmatic man named Mr. Egerton, who cared more for timetables than for empire building. He took one look at the ledger and distanced the company from Silas Harlan with impressive speed. The company was misled, Egerton declared to the court, smoothing his silk tie. "We were told the Crimson Valley was uninhabited. We were told the Hart Ranch was a solvent partner. It appears Mr. Harlan was selling us smoke." But the true weight of the proceedings fell on the shoulders of Lily Harlan. She took the stand on a Tuesday morning. The heat was stifling, the air thick with the smell of sweat and judgment. She wore a simple dress of gray cotton, high-necked and unadorned. She looked pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. but her eyes were dry. "Miss Hart," the prosecutor began, stumbling over her name before correcting himself. "Mrs. Harlan, you claim that your marriage was entered into under duress." "It was a transaction, sir," Lily said clearly. Her voice did not waver, though 100 pairs of eyes were boring her. "My father left us with debts we could not pay. Silas Harlan bought those debts. He told me that if I did not marry him, he would foreclose on our land and see my brother destitute. The price of the ranch was my hand." A ripple of whispers went through the room. The women of Red Rock, who had envied Lily her lace and her wealthy husband only days ago, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and scandalized horror. To leave a husband was a sin. To run away with a Navajo warrior was a transgression that defied their understanding. "And the night you fled," the prosecutor pressed, "you left with the accused, Kai Nez. I left with the man who saved my life," Lily corrected him. "And I left to save the life of my brother. Silas threatened to kill Jamie if we revealed his fraud. We had nowhere else to go." "You went to the Savages," a man in the back shouted. The judge banged his gavel. "One more outburst and I will clear this court." Lily looked directly at the heckler. "I went to a place where honor still meant something. Silas Harlan wore a silk suit and sat in the front pew of the church. Yet he was willing to blow up a train and kill innocent men to cover his crimes. The people in the valley, they gave us bread when we were hungry and shelter when we were hunted. You call them savages. I call them decent." Silence descended on the room. It was an uncomfortable, itching silence. Lily had held up a mirror to the town, and they did not like the reflection. She was a woman who had walked through fire, and though they whispered about her loose morals for riding off with a warrior, they could not deny the steel in her spine. While the town of Red Rock wrestled with its ghosts, Kai Nez was fighting a different battle in the quiet sanctuary of the Crimson Valley. The knife wound in his shoulder was deep, and the infection had burned hot for 3 days. He lay on a bed of furs in Hashke's hogan, drifting in and out of fever dreams. In his delirium, he heard the train whistle screaming like a dying animal, and he felt the terrifying weight of Silas dragging him toward the abyss. But every time the darkness threatened to pull him under, a cool hand would touch his forehead. A voice would murmur words he could not quite catch, pulling him back to the surface. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Kai opened his eyes to see the sunlight filtering through the smoke hole of the hogan. The air smelled of burning sage and roasting corn. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed him back down. "Easy, warrior," a voice rasped. Hashke sat by the fire, whittling a piece of cedar. The elder looked older than before, his skin like a dried riverbed, but his eyes were bright. "You have slept a long time," Hashke said. "The world has kept turning without you." "Lily?" Kai asked, his voice a dry croak. "She is here," Hashke said. "She goes to the town to speak to the judge, but she returns every evening. She is stubborn, like a mule." Kai managed a weak smile. "She is a heart. She is something else now," Hashke mused. He set down the wood and looked at Kai. "You saved the valley. Kai Nez, the railroad man, has agreed to the southern route. They will lay their iron snake around the mesa, 20 miles away. The bridge will be used for wagons, not trains. Our dead will sleep in peace." Kai let out a breath he felt he had been holding for a lifetime. "Then it is done. The war for the land is done," Hashke agreed. "But the war inside you, that is just the beginning." The old man leaned forward. "You have lived with 1 foot in the fort and 1 foot in the hogan for too long. It tears a man apart to stand so wide. Now you have brought a white woman into the center of our world. The town will not want her back, and some of our people, they will look at her with cold eyes. She belongs where she chooses," Kai said fiercely, though the effort made his shoulder throb. "And where do you choose?" Hashke asked. "You have done your duty. You have paid your debt to the spirits. Now you must ask your heart what it wants. Do you want to be a legend who saved the valley, or a man who builds a home?" Recovery was a slow, humbling process. For a man used to relying on his strength, being invalid was a torment. but it was also a time of unexpected grace. Jamie Hart, the boy who had been terrified of his own shadow a week ago, became a fixture in the valley. Stripped of his entitled rancher identity, he found a new purpose in labor. He helped the Navajo men repair the corral fences that Silas's hired hands had damaged. He was clumsy at first, his hands soft, but he did not complain. One afternoon, Kai sat outside the hogan, his arm in a sling, watching Jamie struggle to saddle a particularly spirited Mustang. A Navajo warrior named TSO watched with amusement, then stepped in to show the boy how to whisper to the horse rather than fight it. Jamie listened, nodding seriously. He touched the horse's nose, murmuring low words, and the animal calmed. "He learns fast," Kai said. Lily looked up from where she was sitting nearby. She had a basket of wool on her lap and was clumsily trying to spin it onto a spindle, under the patient instruction of Hashke's daughter. "He needed to stop being Jamie Hart, heir to a failure," Lily said softly. "He needed to just be Jamie." She put down the wool and looked at Kai. The bruising on her wrists from the ropes had faded to a dull yellow. She looked tired, but the haunting fear that had shadowed her face for weeks was gone. "The judge gave his ruling today," she said. Kai braced himself. "And the debt is void," she said. "Silas's estate is in receivership to pay back the railroad and the insurance company. The court ruled that the contract I signed was based on fraud." She took a deep breath. "I am a widow, Kai, and I am free. The ranch, half of it will be sold to cover the legitimate debts my father left. But the other half, the half that borders the canyon, is ours, Jamie and mine." "And the marriage?" Kai asked. "Annulled," she said. "It is as if it never happened." "It happened," Kai said, touching his wounded shoulder. "We carry the marks." "Yes," Lily agreed, her eyes darkening. "But marks heal." The weeks turned into a month. The heat of summer began to soften into the golden light of early autumn. The cottonwoods along the river turned a brilliant yellow, dropping leaves like gold coins onto the water. Marshal Boone rode out to the valley one final time. He did not bring a posse, only a bottle of good whiskey which he offered to Hashke. "I am stepping down," Boone told Kai as they stood by the river. "The town council wants a younger man, someone who did not let a madman almost blow up a train." "You took the shot, Boone," Kai reminded him. "You saved us on that bridge." "I took the shot late," Boone said heavily. "I let Silas walk all over this territory for years because he signed the paychecks. Law and justice, they are not always the same thing, are they?" "Rarely," Kai said. "I reckon I will move west," Boone said, tipping his hat. "Maybe California, somewhere the rails have not reached yet." He looked at Kai, then at Lily, who was washing clothes by the riverbank. "You watch your back, Kai. People in town, they have short memories for gratitude and long memories for prejudice. But you two, you made a hell of a fight." With Boone gone and the legal battles settled, a quiet rhythm took over. It was the rhythm of two worlds slowly, tentatively bleeding into one. Lily did not try to become Navajo. She wore her cotton dresses, though she mended them with deerskin patches. She cooked stew in iron pots, but she added wild onions and herbs she learned from the tribal women. She was a bridge, just as Kai was. And Kai, for the first time in his life, stopped looking for the next battle. One evening, when the moon was full and painting the canyon walls in silver, Kai asked Lily to walk with him. They followed the creek upstream, away from the hogans, away from Jamie and Hashke, to a secluded spot where the water pooled deep and still against the rock. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine from the high country. Kai stopped and turned to her. His shoulder was stiff, but he could move his arm now. He reached out and took her hand. Her palm was rougher than it had been, calloused from work, and to him, it felt perfect. "The elders are talking," Kai said quietly. "About us?" Lily asked, her heart beating faster. "About the winter," Kai said. "They will move to the lower camp soon. They ask if the white woman and her brother go back to their ranch house." Lily looked at the water. "The ranch house is empty. It is full of ghosts. I do not want to live in a house built by men who are dead." She looked up at him. I want to be where you are. Kai stepped closer. The space between them was charged, not with the desperate adrenaline of the chase, but with a slow, burning warmth. I am not a rich man. Lily, Kai said. I have a horse, a rifle, and a name that half the territory spits on. I have had a rich husband, Lily whispered, stepping into his space, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. He gave me diamond necklaces and a cage. I do not want diamonds. Kai, I want the sky. She reached up and undid the pins in her hair. The heavy mass of it fell around her shoulders, catching the moonlight. It was an intimate gesture, a shedding of the final layer of her old life. You kept the stone, she said, touching the turquoise amulet at his wrist. For 10 years. It was my compass, Kai said. His voice dropped to a murmur. It pointed to the only thing that mattered. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, a slow exploration of relief and promise. There was no urgency now. They had all the time in the world. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her against him, feeling the solid reality of her presence. I was so afraid, she whispered against his lips. On the bridge, I thought I would lose you the moment I found you. You cannot lose me, Kai promised. I am tethered to you, like the earth to the moon. They sat by the water for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms and the heavy buffalo robe Kai had brought. They did not speak of the pain or the fire. They spoke of the future. Jamie wants to build a cabin, Lily said, resting her head on his shoulder. Not at the ranch, but here, at the mouth of the valley, where the rock meets the grass. A good place. Kai nodded. Good water, protected from the wind. A place between, Lily mused. Not quite town, not quite a tribe. A place for us, Kai said. It was the first time he had included himself in that future aloud. The words hung in the air, solid and real. The next morning, the work began. It was not the work of war, but the work of peace. Jamie and Kai rode out to the spot Lily had mentioned. It was a small plateau overlooking the valley entrance, commanding a view of the red rocks to the west and the distant plains to the east. We will need timber, Jamie said, looking at the site with a carpenter's eye. And stone for the foundation. There is fallen cedar in the high canyon, Kai said, and the river gives us stone. They worked side by side, the Navajo warrior and the rancher's son. They stripped logs and hauled rock. Hashke watched them from the valley floor, smoking his pipe, a satisfied smile on his face. The railroad had moved on. The tracks were being laid 20 miles south, a faint line of dust on the horizon that no longer threatened their world. The boom of the dynamite was replaced by the rhythmic thud of axes and the ring of hammers. Lily brought them water at noon. She watched Kai lift a heavy beam, his muscles moving under his shirt, the scar on his shoulder a jagged white line against his dark skin. He caught her watching him and smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes. It was a smile she had not seen since he was a boy of 22 in a rain-soaked cave. You look happy, she said, handing him the ladle. I am tired, Kai admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. But it is very tiring. It is the tiredness of building, not destroying. He looked out over the valley. The corn was high and golden. The horses were grazing peacefully. The shadow of Silas Harlan had finally lifted, burned away by the desert sun. The winter will be hard, Kai said, looking at the sky. The snow gets deep here. We have wood, Lily said, touching his arm. We have food. And we have walls. And we have time, Kai added. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. It was a small gesture, but in the bright light of day, in full view of the valley and the distant road to town, it was a declaration. The falling action of their lives had settled into a steady, strong beat. The tragedy was over. The romance was no longer a secret whispered in the dark. It was a house being built on a hill, a flag planted in the middle ground. As the sun began to lower, casting long golden shadows across the grass, Kai Nez turned to the east. He could see the faint smoke of the train in the far distance, heading toward the Pacific. Let it go, he thought. Let the world rush by on its iron wheels. He had his world right here. "Come," Kai said to Lily and Jamie. "The soup is hot, and the fire is waiting." They walked down the hill together, 3 figures against the vast, enduring landscape of the West. They walked away from the past and into the quiet, hard-won evening of their lives. 3 years had passed since the day the bridge over the canyon did not fall. Time in the Arizona Territory usually moved with the slow, grinding patience of geology, measuring itself in the erosion of sandstone and the deepening of dry riverbeds. But recently, time has begun to move with the speed of steam. The railroad, diverted 20 miles to the south by a company that had learned the hard way that some obstacles were best navigated around rather than through, was finished. From the high ridge of the Crimson Valley, one could sometimes see the smoke of the locomotive, a thin gray ribbon unspooling against the blue horizon. It was a reminder of the world that was rushing toward the 20th century. But here, in the shelter of the red rocks, the rhythm of life followed the rising of the sun and the turning of the seasons. Red Rock itself had changed. The tension that had once pulled the town as tight as a bowstring had slackened. The army, finding no rebellion to crush and no wealthy patron to bribe them into action, had reduced its garrison. The saloon still served whiskey that could strip paint, and men still argued over cattle prices, but the venom was gone. Navajo weavers now sold their blankets in front of the general store, and it was not uncommon to see a rancher trading tobacco with a warrior for a good horse. It was not a paradise. Prejudice was a weed with deep roots, and it did not die overnight. There were still men who spat when a native walked by, and there were still natives who looked at the town with guarded mistrust. But the violence, the sharp, bloody edge of hatred had been dulled by the necessity of commerce and the simple, undeniable fact of coexistence. At the mouth of the valley, where the grazing land met the sheer rise of the cliffs, a house stood. It was a structure that defied the architectural norms of the territory. It was not the imposing, fortress-like manor that Silas Harlan had built, nor was it a traditional hogan. It was a cabin of hewn cedar logs, backed right up against the stone face of the mesa so that the living rock formed the rear wall of the main room. A wide porch looked out over a paddock where spotted ponies and quarter horses grazed side by side. Inside, the house was a physical manifestation of the truce Kai and Lily had forged. On the floor, thick wool rugs woven with the geometric storms of Navajo mythology covered the planks. On the table, a set of fine porcelain plates salvaged from the ruin of the Hart estate sat upon a lace tablecloth. A Winchester rifle hung over the fireplace, crossed with a ceremonial lance adorned with eagle feathers. It was late afternoon, and the air was filled with the high, bright sound of children. Lily sat on the steps of the porch, a book open on her lap. She was 30 years old now, and the sun had etched fine lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of laughter and squinting against the glare. She wore a dress of blue calico, practical and sturdy, but around her neck hung a silver necklace of native craftsmanship. Gathered around her were 7 children. 3 were Navajo, their hair black as raven wings. 2 were the children of the town blacksmith, a man who had decided that reading was a skill his sons needed more than prejudice. The last 2 were orphans from a wagon train that had failed to make the pass, taken in by the tribe. And then, Lily read, her voice clear and melodic, the giant realized that his garden was cold because he had built a wall to keep the children out. She looked up. The children were entranced. A little Navajo girl named Yazi leaned against the knee of a freckle-faced boy from town. They did not look at each other as enemies. They looked at the book as a window, 50 yards away, in the round pen. Kainez was working with the older boys. He moved with a limp now, a souvenir from the bullet that had shattered his hip on the bridge. But on a horse, he was as fluid as water. "Do not pull," Kai called out, his voice carrying easily on the breeze. "Ask. The horse is not a slave. He's a partner. If you pull, he fights. If you ask, he answers." He watched as the blacksmith's eldest son, a gangly boy of 14, softened his hands on the reins. The colt he was riding lowered its head and exhaled, chewing the bit. "Good," Kai nodded. "Now let him walk." Lily closed the book. She watched her husband. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into buckskin trousers, his hair tied back with a leather thong. He looked at the boy with a pride that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with spirit. This was their vengeance against Silas Harlan. Not death, but life. Not destruction, but a slow, stubborn growth that knit the torn edges of the world back together. Jamie Hart rode up from the valley floor, sitting tall in the saddle. At 23, he was the foreman of the combined herds, managing the cattle that grazed on the recovered Hart land and the sheep that grazed in the valley. He tipped his hat to Lily. "The herd looks good. Lil," Jamie said, dismounting to get a drink from the trough. "Fat and happy, we will fetch a good price in Santa Fe next month. Make sure you keep enough for the winter stores," Lily reminded him. "Hashke says the snow will be heavy this year." "Hashke always says the snow will be heavy," Jamie laughed. "But I will put aside 10 steers for the tribe. And I spoke to the miller in town. He is willing to trade flour for wool again." "Good," Lily smiled. "Stay for supper. We are having stew." "Cannot," Jamie said, remounting. "I promised a girl in town I would take her to the social dance, the baker's daughter." Lily watched him ride off, a young man with a future that belonged to him, not to a ledger of debts. Night fell over the desert like a heavy velvet blanket. The stars were so bright they seemed to hum, a vast, indifferent canopy of light that made human troubles feel small. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the stone hearth. The children had gone home, the town children riding back with their fathers who came to fetch them. The Navajo children running down the path to the Hogans in the valley. The house was quiet. It was a good quiet. Not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of completion. Kai sat in the rocking chair by the fire, oiling a bridle. The smell of leather and wood smoke filled the room. Lily sat on the rug at his feet, leaning her back against his legs. She was wrapped in a blanket patterned with red and black diamonds. She watched the flames dance, thinking of how far they had come. She thought of the rain in the canyon when she was 12. She thought of the dust storm. She thought of the bridge trembling under the weight of the train. She reached up and rested her hand on Kai's knee. He stopped his work, his hand covering hers. His skin was rough, scarred from a life of survival, but his touch was gentle. Lily tilted her head back to look at him. The firelight cast deep shadows on his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his dark eyes. "You are thinking too loud," Kai murmured, a small smile playing on his lips. "I was thinking about the beginning," Lily said softly. "The beginning was a long time ago." Kai said, "Was it?" She turned her body so she could rest her cheek against his knee. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another life entirely." She traced the pattern on the blanket. "Do you know what the women in town say? They say I tamed the wolf?" Kai chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "And do you know what the warriors say? They say the white flower has thorns of iron?" Lily laughed, a sound that was free of burden. "We are quite a pair. Aren't we a scandal in both worlds?" "A bridge," Kai corrected her. "We are a bridge." The mood shifted, settling into something warmer, deeper. The coyote pack began to sing in the distance, a chaotic chorus of yips and howls that echoed off the canyon walls. It was the music of the wild, untamed and beautiful. Lily looked up at him again, her eyes playful but filled with a profound emotion. She pitched her voice to a whisper, mimicking the terrified girl she had been in the church doorway 3 years ago. "You don't remember me, do you? Navajo warrior," she whispered. "I was the girl you left behind." Kai set the bridle down on the floor. He reached down and took her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I remember," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "You were the girl who brought me home." He leaned down and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of years. It held the memory of the rain, the desperation of the chase, and the peace of the fire. Lily rose to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. He pulled her up into his lap, the blanket falling around them both. "I am home," she whispered against his neck. "I am exactly where I belong." "Yes," Kai said, holding her tight against the darkness of the world outside. "You are." The next morning broke with a clarity that stung the eyes. The sky was a hard, polished turquoise, the exact color of the stone Kai wore on his wrist. They rode out early, before the heat of the day could settle. They rode side by side, their knees brushing occasionally. Lily was on her mare, Kai on his paint. They did not head toward the town, nor toward the herd. They rode up the ridge, to the highest point of the Crimson Valley. From here, the world stretched out in all directions. To the east, the plains rolled away into the haze. To the west, the red monoliths of the monuments stood like sentinels of time. The wind up here was clean. It whipped Lily's hair across her face and made the horses' manes dance. Far away, on the southern horizon, a tiny plume of black smoke marked the passage of the morning train. The whistle blew, a thin, lonely sound that was swallowed by the immensity of the landscape. Kai watched it. 10 years ago, that sound would have filled him with rage. It would have sounded like an invasion. Now, it was just a noise. The train passed. The land remained. He looked at Lily. She was watching a hawk circle a thermal updraft. She looked fierce and free, a woman who had claimed her own destiny with both hands. She felt his gaze and turned to him. She smiled, and the sun seemed to grow brighter. "Race you to the creek," she challenged, her eyes dancing. "You will lose," Kai warned, gathering his reins. "I have a lighter load." She laughed. "And a faster horse? We shall see, Mrs. Nez," Kai said. "We shall see." They kicked their horses into a gallop. They flew across the top of the mesa, 2 specks of motion against the stillness of eternity. They were not running from anything anymore. They were running toward the joy of the morning. Below them, in the valley, old Hashke stepped out of his hogan. He squinted against the sun, watching the 2 riders on the ridge. He saw them racing the wind, their laughter carried down to him like a prayer. He took a puff of his pipe and nodded. He had seen blood, and he had seen fire, but he had lived long enough to see something else. He had lived to see the roots of 2 different trees tangle together in the earth and hold fast against the storm. "It is good," the old man whispered in his native tongue, miles away. On the boardwalk of Red Rock, Marshal Boone, now retired and walking with a cane, paused to watch a young Navajo man leading a mule team loaded with corn into the dry goods store. The shopkeeper, a man who had once called for the army to wipe the valley clean, came out and shook the young man's hand, inspecting the goods with respect. Boone adjusted his hat. The pistol at his hip felt heavy and useless. He didn't think he would need it today. He nodded to the Navajo man as he passed. The young warrior nodded back. It was a small thing, a gesture that vanished in a second, but it was a crack in the wall, and through the crack, the light was getting in. The west was still wild. It was still hard. There were still droughts and blizzards and rattlesnakes. But as Kai and Lily disappeared over the ridge, riding together into the vast, open embrace of the canyon, the land seemed to breathe easier. It was no longer a place of just guns and gold. It was a place where a man and a woman could carve out a space large enough to hold 2 worlds. It was a place where, finally, they were free. Thank you so much for riding along with me on this journey through the dust and the heart of the Crimson Valley. I hope Kai and Lily's story touched something in you, reminding us all that love is the only force strong enough to bridge the deepest divides. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you are listening to this story from. It is always amazing to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more adventures from the frontier, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Do not forget to like the video and hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.